Hello and welcome to Communication Conflict Resolution. Of course, as always, I'm your instructor, Michael Betker. This week, obviously, we're talking about negotiation, like we talked about before, and how to resolve conflicts using negotiation. And really what we're focused on here this week is just an article from the book. And the book is entitled Secrets of Power Negotiating by Roger Dawson. So what we're going to learn this week is really some handy information about how to negotiate in various ways, and some of the tips and tricks he supplies to us in this article, I think, are tremendously helpful. So I would say this: if you're watching this video first, obviously that's a good thing. So watch this, and obviously you want to also read the article "Secrets of Power Negotiating." Also, I've got a couple other videos here, short ones. One's on Shark Tank, and it's the idea of the power of walking away, and we'll talk about that. And if you read the article, you'll get a feel for what that means. But just the fact that that's the one thing we have in our hip pocket that we can always do is to walk away from a situation. So in other words, if you're negotiating and you don't like how it's going, or if you don't feel like you're getting the best price on something, for example, you can simply walk away. Of course, there's also another video here that I think would help kind of beef up the article, and it's entitled The 10 Secrets of Power Negotiating. So those two items there will then fortify and derive awareness for your thought piece number 5, which is negotiating. And then also we've got the number quiz 11, which is due on Sunday, April 28th, called Secrets of Power Negotiating. Again, so focused on the article. Okay, so point values, obviously, it's 40 points for the thought piece, which is 40 points, and then 15 points for the quiz. So we had 55 points in total this week. There again is the book. We're going to talk about that. I'm going to take you through kind of a highlight reel of some of the major concepts discussed in this book. First, I want to talk about this idea of, like we talked about, the power of walking away. And this was something that, again, our good friend Henry Kissinger said. He said, effectiveness at the negotiating table depends upon overstating demands. So here's another way to look at this. This idea of asking for more than you expect is what he's getting after here, okay? So that's what he's talking about when he says effectiveness at the negotiating table depends upon how overstating demands. So in other words, asking for the sun and the moon and the stars. So asking for way more than you expect to get is a great way to start out any negotiation. So a couple things that happen when you ask for more than you really want. At first, it raises the perceived value of what you're offering. So you will basically create the space in the minds of your negotiating partner as to what the value of things are. It also helps prevent deadlocking. In other words, it's deadlock. When something becomes deadlocked, it's essentially where you are not able to negotiate. So there's no room to go up or down. You're stuck in the middle. So if you're at a high end, it gives you an opportunity to kind of move down, and that gives them an opportunity to move up to a new number. So deadlocking is when you both have the same number in mind and you're not willing to budge. It also allows you to establish maximum plausible position, or MPP, and implies flexibility. So really the maximum plausible position is really the highest number, or if you're using like money as an example, the highest amount of money you could possibly get. And the last point there, power negotiators know that first offers seem extreme but are only the beginning. So a lot of times people get flabbergasted by the original offer. Just know that people who know what they're doing often will throw a big number out there on purpose, just for the same reason. So this is kind of one of the key concepts of this article, asking for more than you expect. Okay, so Kissinger also, this is something about Kissinger just to kind of level the playing field with you guys. He also said the illegal we do immediately, the unconstitutional takes a little longer. So, sort of a more nefarious quote from this guy. And I just wanted to kind of balance this out here because we've talked about Kissinger quite a bit. So he does have some sort of dark side mentalities about negotiation. All right, so the author, some of the key points here again also is the myth of win-win. In other words, the author thinks, and we've talked about win-win a lot in class, and I would say it is a high watermark or a goal. It is not always achievable, so he's right about that. Now, whether or not he thinks it's like a myth that you can even ever have a win-win, I don't know if I agree with that necessarily, but his approach for the book is to suggest that win-wins are not likely. So therefore, you've got to take a different position. So power negotiating takes a different way to look at this. And really what it is, in a nutshell, is teaching us how to win at the negotiating table, but also to make the other person feel like they also won. Okay, so that's very important. So in other words, you don't want them coming back and feeling, after a bad deal, feeling angst about that bad deal. Because, again, what Kissinger's also said, that would come back to haunt you in future negotiations. So at the very minimum, you want to make sure that they feel like they've got something of value. So how do you do that? Well, some of the things he talked about are gambits. Now, gambit is a term that you use in chess. It's really synonymous with that, but you'll see this word gambit used also in negotiating circles as well. So what is that? That's a device, action, or opening remark, typically one entailing a degree of risk that is calculated to gain an advantage. For example, his resignation was a tactical gambit. Now, what that suggests there is a person who resigns only to see if they were willing to keep him or her, and offer them more money maybe. So I think that's a pretty risky gambit, but nonetheless, it is a gambit. So that's one example. We'll talk about a few others here as well in this class, in this article. Okay, that's the Queen Mother there, and I love that face she's making. I'm not sure what she made that for, but so here's this thing. What I want to say is just never say yes to the first offer. That's the first thing there, right? Why, even if it sounds like a really good deal, why would you do that? Or why wouldn't you do that? If you do, it triggers two negative thoughts in the counterpart's mind. First, gosh, if they say yes right away, it means they could have done better. They think they could have done better, and that kind of taints the deal. And the second piece, of course, is that they automatically think there's something wrong. Now, to give an example, I'll use this example throughout this lecture here. My wife and I just had a car failure recently. Our Kia engine just gave out on us, probably because we didn't put enough oil in the engine. But either way, we've been car shopping, so we've been doing some of the negotiations here. So I'll use that as an example today. But we got a really good deal on a Honda Pilot, a 2012 Honda Pilot, as a replacement car. And right away I thought, gosh, why is this such a good deal? What's wrong with this car? So it was listed, probably about $3,000 below market value, another Blue Book value, in other words. So I automatically thought, gosh, what is wrong? But the Carfax checked out, and so far so good. So we've had the car for exactly a week, but my wife loves it, and I, of course, do as well. But anyway, that's the idea, right? If you take that first offer, something must be wrong according to the seller. So this is what the Queen Mother's doing here. She's flinching. So that's something you can do, obviously, to create an initial. What you basically do is you take charge of the initial negotiation by flinching. So what's flinching? It could be a number of things. Most often, if you're face-to-face, a flinch will let the person know that you find the original offer, the initial offer, to be completely out of line, even if it may not be. So either way, what you can do is flinch, and what that does is just uses your body language in such a way that it creates a message. It sends a message to the seller that is completely out of line. That number is way too high, and maybe it is in some cases, right? So you maybe truly are flinching, but what you should do is flinch either way, and that really sets the tone and the pace, and it gives you kind of the upper hand in those early conversations regarding, especially if you're haggling for price. The other thing is too is you want to avoid confrontation if you don't say yes to the first offer, right? So get into the habit of agreeing initially and turning it around. Use the feel, felt, found formula. I love this, and I've used this before, right? And here's the quote I want to share with you guys on this. And this is a great way to help avoid confrontation. So, quote, "I understand exactly how you feel." There's the feel about that. "Many other people have felt exactly the same way. But you know what we have always found? When we took a closer look, we found that they changed their minds, of course." So essentially, it's the feel, felt, found formula. Essentially, you're saying, I know how you feel, so I understand and appreciate your feelings on the matter. Others may have felt that way. In fact, we may have felt that way as well at one point. But what we found, based on our research, is that we found, after a closer look, that X happens. So feel, felt, found. And I've used this a lot to explain things to clients in marketing and advertising when they question a strategy of some kind. And oftentimes it's not something you're lying about, it's something that's actually happened. So either way, the feel, felt, found approach can help you avoid confrontation. All right, so another thing the article talks about here, and Donald Trump, a very young-looking Donald Trump there, has used this to great effect over the years. Now, Donald Trump, as we know, is a businessman first, and not always successful, I would say. But in this case here, the example the article uses is where Donald Trump used the reluctant buyer or seller, in this case, the reluctant seller. He had a building that was distressed and created a situation where he made the person, a potential buyer, believe that he really didn't want to part ways with this building. The reality is, behind the scenes, Donald Trump was in rough shape financially, and he needed to sell the building. But he created this situation where it felt like to the buyer that he was reluctant to sell it, and therefore, and ergo, he was able to kind of sell the building for a pretty penny, even though the building was undervalued. So that's a good example of that there. Reluctant buyer and seller, and it goes both ways. Another technique that you can use, which is a quick way to kind of gain the upper hand, is called the vice technique. And essentially it's saying this: you'll have to do better than that. So oftentimes, in fact, I'll use the example again of my wife and I when we bought our Pilot at Russ Darrow Ford in Brookfield. So we were in there, and we found the car. We liked the car a lot. We didn't want to admit that we liked the car so much, so we kind of played it close to the vest, and that's one of the rules, right? You don't want to admit you like something too much, because then obviously you lose some traction with negotiation. But my wife and I had her phone out. She was actually calculating the price of the car we were looking to buy, and it's really important for us to hit a certain number of a monthly payment. So we came up to that number, and it was roughly around $270. So we knew kind of what to expect, and we had to take a loan out to get the car. And the salesman who came back to us had a piece of paper written down with a number that was almost double our number. And why is that? Because he had written down something that was related to some other add-ons, an extended warranty for a car that already had 120,000 miles, and some other sort of device. I would call it a device because I think that's where they make their money. Either way, we right away said, you're going to have to do better than that. We know we have a number to hit. And we went through this process 3 times. So we used the vice technique 3 times before we finally got to the number that we told him we needed. At an APR that we knew we should have. Our credit's good, so we should have gotten, 3.99%. And we got very near to that finally. But it took a while, and we had to use the vice technique. We essentially said, you'll have to do better than that, or we're going to walk. Now, one thing you'll notice if you ever buy a car is if you leave the store, they'll do everything in their power to keep you there, because they want you to walk out with the keys. They don't want you to leave because they know the next day, more than likely, you won't come back and you won't buy the car. So we knew that there was also another sort of emotional thing that we had in our favor. So we threatened to walk away at one point, and that's when he went back and finally sharpened the pencil. And we got very near, within $6 of the goal number we wanted to have for our monthly payment. So anyway, that's the vice technique, and a good personal example that just happened recently to me. All right, another sort of trick and tip that the article talks about, something called higher authority. Essentially, once a negotiation, you are in one, it's always good to postpone a decision and plead that you have to run the deal by someone outside a person of higher authority. So that's a trick I've used a lot, and typically when I worked in marketing, I had a lot of folks calling and kind of pushing things on me, and I would always use this higher authority technique to get off the phone with the person and essentially just kick the can down the road. Now, they wouldn't stop pestering me, but essentially it bought me some time. So in every case I wanted to postpone, and sometimes it was true I had to talk to my boss about making a decision about stuff, but a lot of times I just didn't want to make the decision right then, and I wanted to take control. So I used the higher authority approach. Now, why is this good? Because the other side will make more concessions to people they don't see or know than they will to you alone. So that's important, right? And there's a counter to this too as well. The article talks about this, and the Gambit counter is this: You can say this when someone says, I have to talk to my boss. Here's what you can say as a counter. Is there any reason before we continue that would prevent us from striking a deal today? And I actually heard the sales guy, when we bought our car recently, say that exact same thing. So that's the higher authority approach. Another tip that the article talks about, which I think is really important, is this idea of setting it aside for a while. So in negotiations, you'll find often that you are in complete disagreement on one issue. So that could be a big gating issue. It could be something that's really, really important to the other party or both of you guys, both parties. What you want to do is don't let that one bad apple spoil the barrel. And I would do this. In fact, I've done this where you just stop and you say, hey, what do you say we go get lunch? Or what do you say we go take a break? Let's take a half hour, or take an hour, or whatever, and cleanse the palate. And then come back. And I think changing venues is good. I think changing the conversation, changing the people in the room, even bringing different people in, and maybe just tell a funny story or other things like that to lighten the mood. Or maybe go to dinner and regroup. But either way, recalibrate. It's like almost like saying, all right, that's not working. It's kind of like when you watch baseball and you see a pitcher who, somebody gets a hit on a pitcher, and what do? They call up the bullpen and they bring a new pitcher in. So it's almost the same thing there, getting a fresh cut at it. And what that does, it gives you a chance to recalibrate and rethink about that bad apple. And what you can do is look for other apples in the barrel that you both agree on. So the bad apple's still there, but you want to find another way, another pathway that doesn't go directly through that bad apple. And the more kind of yeses you get, the more agreements you get amongst the multiple things you're talking about, negotiating over, the more likely you're going to get a chance to get that deal. So don't let that, you've heard this statement, don't let the bad apple spoil the whole bunch. Well, here's an example of that here. So set it aside. All right, so the article also talks about concession. This is kind of an important fact to note here. And concessions are really things that happen, a lot of times happen in the 11th hour or toward the very end of the deal. And what they are is just things you'll give up in exchange for a final deal. So first point here is don't make equal size concessions. So this will make the other party assume that future concessions of the same size will be his right. So when you get close to the end here, especially, your concessions should be smaller and smaller and smaller as you move forward. So in other words, you never want to make that final concession a big one. It never looks final if it's big. So really these smaller concessions should be like, we'll validate parking versus we're going to give you X number of dollars. So smaller items as you get to the end, because that signals the end, frankly. The third point, don't refuse a smaller concession after a big one. This can make you seem difficult and creates needless hostility. So I've seen people do this as well just to win or make a point, and all that does is frustrate the other person. So don't you refuse a smaller concession after a big one. So these are some tips on how to make concessions correctly. Make time your ally. So the article also talks about something called the 80-20 rule, which is a Pareto analysis. And essentially it says this: 80% of all concessions happen in the last 20% of time remaining. So back to our concessions here, like I mentioned, these things happen toward the end, and it's usually a flurry of activity where people are trying to scramble and get as much as they can and tacking these things on in the last moment. Again, using politics is another example here. You see what's called pork barrel spending. You get all of these other little tack-ons to bills that happen to get passed. So another example of that, but that's really what concessions are in a way. So making time your ally, and this cover of Time magazine here talks about this. Now, this is peace talks that happened in Paris some time ago between our government and Korea back in the day. And Korea knew something. They knew that we had to advance or make a decision by the end of the month because of our political cycle. So they just waited it out, basically, and they forced the hand of our nation. So that's kind of in a nutshell what happened there. But if you know that there's a time frame for the other person, you can kind of wait them out, almost essentially just sit in a tree until they give up, or because they have to go somewhere else or do something else. So that's a good example of using time to your advantage. So I guess the takeaway there is never reveal your deadlines. the longer you can keep the other party involved in negotiations, the more likely that it is to move around to your point of view. All right, so what's the most dangerous moment in negotiation? It's not the beginning, it's not the middle, it's not the pre-negotiations even. It's when the deal is almost done, or when the deal is seemingly done. So what you want to do here in this case is don't leave yourself vulnerable to these last-minute nibbles. Okay, in other words, this is like I said, when like the sharks come out and look for any little bite they can take that is extra than what is agreed to. So first thing you want to do is obviously you start having this happen. You want to keep your emotions in check. If they are pressing you pretty hard, or if they ask for things like extra training, installation, or extended warranties, or anything like that, don't let the euphoria of finishing a negotiation cost you the store at the end of the day. So don't die or drown 10 feet from shore when the deal is nearly done. What you can do is something we've talked about, just kind of avoidance in a way, is to say something like, I don't have the authority to make concessions right now. So, maybe you made the phone call, and I've done this already. So I've made the phone call right after a deal is done. I make the phone call to my boss. And that's sort of a signal to the other negotiator that there's nothing else we can do. We can't make any more concessions. So whatever you want to do, you want to kind of push, maybe push blame a little bit on your higher power. So it's the kind of another version of this higher authority, right? I've got to go back to my boss before I can make any more concessions. So here are the last couple things I want to share with you guys. Watch this little video here. This is I like this show a lot. Shark Tank. Essentially, what this is just an example of a couple who came up with an idea, pretty cool idea for called sock tabs. It helps keep your socks together. But the idea was they were willing to walk away when one of the sharks kind of pulled them out of the fire and brought them into the fold. But that's an example of how you have power to walk away. And they did. They were going to walk away. But you'll see if you watch this video, one of the sharks sort of at the last second kind of pulled them back. So that's, again, why I think it's important for you to really walk away. If you're something you really love, right, and it's just not working out, you have the right and the power to say no and just step away from the situation. Now, a lot of times that can go either way. That can net you out, and then maybe they'll call you back. A lot of times car companies will do that. They'll come back with a sharper price when you do that. But either way, you have the power then. You've made the decision, even if you want something badly. The other video here is on top 10 negotiating tips that kind of get at some of the stuff we've discussed in this article. So if you're interested in this topic, I think this video would be fun to watch. And it certainly fortifies our thought piece number 5 as well. So I want you to read the article and watch that video together and kind of talk about that in your thought piece 5, which is about negotiation. So the first thing I want you to do is there some area that you feel so passionate about that you're willing to take on negotiation without hesitation? Why or why not? And then next, referencing the article in our lecture and even the video, I'd say, what is the most likely technique you would use for this? Or other important ideas or areas of negotiation, and why? And then finally, what area of negotiation is uncomfortable for you? Now that's something I can tell you. My wife and I, we were fist bumping ourselves after that when we bought this car recently, because that number was super high. And the last time we bought a car, we were taken in and we paid an exorbitant amount for that Kia because we crazily bought into some stuff that we didn't really need. So we stuck to our guns, used the vice technique, and got the number we were expecting. So tell me your story. What's uncomfortable for you? Do you struggle to ask for a raise, or to tell your significant other what you need, or what they're doing is driving you crazy? So all these things here. Think about how you might feel uncomfortable with certain negotiations and how you might lean into that. What are some things you've learned from this article that might help you overcome that? Last thing I want to talk about is, of course, quiz number 11, which is our final quiz, reading quiz, open article, and you have 30 minutes to take 15 questions here. So definitely want to read the article through, because some of the questions can be a little tricky. So make sure you read them thoroughly. All right, that's all I got for you guys this week. Hope you enjoyed this lecture. Looking forward to speaking to you again. We've only got a couple weeks left here, and then we're all done. So this is the last week for our negotiation. So that's a 2-week module. The next one is on apologies and forgiveness, one of my all-time faves.